Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The sharp sound of glass breaking tore through the stillness, jolting Nicholas from his thoughts. His hand trembled as he clutched the whiskey tumbler, eyes fixed on the divorce papers spread haphazardly across the kitchen counter. The house that had once symbolized 13 years of shared love and dreams with Eleanor now felt suffocating, its walls heavy with the weight of unspoken betrayals. Just 2 nights ago, Eleanor had stood in the doorway he now stared at, arms folded, her expression calm yet firm as she delivered her life-altering news. "I'm going on a date, Nicholas," she had said, her tone eerily matter-of-fact. The word date had rolled off her tongue with unsettling casualness, as though it were just another errand on her list. At first, Nicholas had laughed, but the sound was empty and laced with bitterness. "A date?" he had repeated, disbelief dripping from each syllable. "With who? Or should I ask, how many?" Her demeanor didn't falter. "His name is Daniel," she replied, her voice teetering between defiance and hesitation. Her words carried a rehearsed quality, as though she'd practiced them in her head but still struggled to believe them herself. "I need this, Nicholas," she continued, her eyes darting away from his intense gaze. "I need to feel alive again," she admitted softly, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress, betraying the turmoil beneath her composed exterior. "This isn't about you or even us. It's about me. I've felt trapped, stifled by this monotonous routine. I feel like I've disappeared, like I'm just a shadow in my own life." Nicholas's expression remained unreadable, his silence pressing down on her. Still, Eleanor pushed forward, her voice trembling but determined. "For 13 years, I've poured everything into this marriage, into us, into building this life. I don't regret any of it, not for a second. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I've forgotten who I am outside of being your wife." Her voice broke slightly as she swallowed back the lump in her throat, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Daniel reminded me of a part of myself I haven't seen in years. Someone carefree, someone alive, before everything became about bills and schedules and responsibilities." Nicholas's jaw tightened, his face a mask of restraint, but he still refused to speak. The oppressive silence pushed Eleanor to continue, her words raw and filled with emotion. "I didn't plan this. I never wanted to hurt you. But when I'm with him, I feel seen. I feel wanted in ways I haven't felt in so long. And it's not just physical," she added quickly, as though that distinction might somehow soften the blow. "It's emotional. He makes me feel important, like I'm alive." Her gaze searched his face, pleading for a sign of understanding, but his eyes remained cold and distant. "I know this hurts," she said, her voice barely audible, "and I'm so sorry. But I can't keep living this lie. I feel like I'm dying inside. I need to rediscover myself, and I can't do that while trapped in the life we've built." The silence that followed her words was suffocating, each second stretching unbearably. At last, Nicholas broke it, his voice low and laced with quiet anger. "So this is your solution? To destroy everything we've built so you can play fantasy with some guy who doesn't have to deal with real life?" Her lips parted as if to respond, but he continued, his tone cutting. "Was all of it, the mortgage, the vacations, the mornings laughing over coffee, was all of it meaningless to you? Do you even hear yourself? You're married, Eleanor. You made vows. What do they mean to you now?" Eleanor's shoulders sagged under the weight of his words, but she remained resolute. "I've given everything to this marriage, Nicholas. It's time I take something for myself." That night, Nicholas didn't argue further. He didn't agree, but he understood the futility of fighting someone who had already chosen to burn the bridge between them. Instead, he delivered his parting words with a cold finality. "Do whatever you want, Eleanor, but remember, actions have consequences." The next morning, Nicholas awoke with a newfound resolve hardening within him. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a challenge, a call to action. He approached the day with a precise determination, reinventing himself piece by piece, He traded his disheveled appearance for a sharp haircut and exchanged his rumpled wardrobe for a sleek navy blazer. Even his car, usually neglected, gleamed after a thorough cleaning, a reflection of his transformed mindset. When Eleanor came downstairs, dressed in an elegant black dress that practically demanded attention, Nicholas barely acknowledged her. She lingered, clearly waiting for a reaction. Jealousy, anger, anything. Instead, she was met with indifference. "Going somewhere?" he asked flatly, keys jingling in his hand. Her lips curled into a faint scowl. "What's that supposed to mean?" Nicholas offered a thin, cutting smile. "Exactly what I said. Enjoy your date, Eleanor. Just remember, there are always consequences." Before she could respond, he walked out, leaving her standing in stunned silence. He drove to a quiet wine bar on the outskirts of town, where Rachel, a co-worker he had grown close to over the past months, was waiting. Their connection had always been innocent, but Eleanor's betrayal had stripped away his hesitations. Now, as he looked at Rachel, he saw her in a new light, not as a colleague, but as a possibility, a chance to rebuild what Eleanor had torn apart. She greeted him with a smile so tender, it felt like the first glimmer of dawn after a long, stormy night. "Nicholas," she said softly, her voice a blend of concern and curiosity, "you seem different." "Different in what way?" he asked, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. Rachel's gaze lingered, her eyes scanning his features with an intensity that spoke of both intrigue and worry. They ordered wine, and as the conversation flowed naturally between them, Nicholas found an unexpected solace. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he laughed, the sound raw and unguarded, catching even himself off guard. But as the evening wore on, a quiet resolve began to take shape within him. This wasn't merely about turning a new page. It was about making sure Eleanor comprehended the gravity of her actions. If she wanted to manipulate the game, Nicholas would ensure he controlled the board. Eleanor returned home late that night, the sharp click of her heels breaking the silence of the tiled hallway. She froze at the sight of Nicholas sitting in the dimly lit living room, a glass of scotch resting in his steady hand. "You're still up," she said cautiously, her tone guarded. Nicholas's eyes met hers, his gaze icy and unyielding. "How was your evening?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. She hesitated, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face. "Nicholas, Don't!" he interrupted, his voice sharp as he set the glass down with a deliberate clink. "I don't care where you've been or who you've seen, but soon you will." Her brow knitted in confusion. "What's that supposed to mean?" Nicholas rose slowly, his movements measured and deliberate. "It means you've made your decision, Eleanor. Now, I've made mine." The next morning, Eleanor awoke to an empty bed. On the kitchen counter lay a single envelope. Inside were divorce papers and a succinct note. "Actions have consequences. Enjoy the freedom you wanted." Freedom, however, was not what awaited her. Nicholas had already begun dismantling the life she had taken for granted. Standing outside Lucas's law office, he held a thick folder brimming with damning evidence, suspicious financial transactions, late-night phone logs, and incriminating photographs, all meticulously compiled to prove her betrayal without revealing the full scope of his strategy. Lucas greeted him with a firm handshake. "You've always been calculated, Nicholas. What's driving you now?" Nicholas's expression darkened. 12 years of deceit. 13 years of giving everything to someone who decided I wasn't enough. She needs to understand what she's thrown away, and it has to hurt. Lucas leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Then we're not just filing for divorce. We're going for total dismantlement." Eleanor's day began like any other, a coffee in hand as she idly scrolled through her phone. But a message from her boss shattered the routine. "Come to the office immediately. We need to discuss your position." When she arrived, Nicholas was waiting in the lobby, exuding a calm yet disconcerting confidence. Beside him sat a private investigator, who handed Eleanor a folder without a word. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photos of her and Daniel in compromising positions, alongside a detailed account of her fabrications, every excuse, every false claim of working late. You, you had me followed? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Nicholas's words were like a blade. You left me no choice. Actions, Eleanor. They always have consequences. Her boss cleared his throat, stepping forward. This behavior breaches company policy. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Without another word, Nicholas turned and walked away, leaving her to grapple with the fallout. When she returned home that evening, she found the locks had been changed. She pounded on the door, shouting his name, but it was a neighbor who approached her with an envelope. Inside was a single key and a brief note. Your belongings are in storage. The address is included. This house is no longer yours. Eleanor's hands shook as she clutched the note. How had her life unraveled so completely? Only days earlier she had convinced herself that Nicholas's devotion was unshakable, that he would always clean up her messes. But the man she had underestimated was now meticulously dismantling her world. Nicholas's retribution was precise, almost surgical. Enlisting the help of Ava, a close confidant who had seen through Eleanor long before he had, he set a plan into motion to ensure Eleanor felt the full weight of her choices. Are you absolutely certain about this? Ava asked, her apartment dimly lit and cluttered with documents and timelines. Nicholas's nod was resolute. She wanted freedom. I'm giving her exactly what she asked for. Ava's lips curved into a knowing smile. You're not just walking away. You're making sure she remembers this for the rest of her life. Eleanor's new reality hit her like a freight train. Her accounts were frozen, entangled in legal disputes. Friends she had once relied on kept their distance, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Even Daniel, the man she had risked everything for, stopped answering her calls after a visit from Nicholas's investigator. Nicholas's actions weren't just about vengeance. They were a calculated unraveling of every comfort, every certainty Eleanor had once taken for granted. One evening, Eleanor appeared at Nicholas's office without warning. Her mascara was smudged from hours of crying. "Nicholas, please," she begged, clutching his arm as though it was her lifeline. "I made a horrible mistake. I see that now. Let me make things right," she pleaded desperately. Nicholas's gaze remained calm but distant, his expression unreadable. "A mistake, Eleanor?" he said, his tone icy. "This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate choice, and now you'll have to face the consequences." As Eleanor grappled with the aftermath of her decisions, Nicholas seemed to flourish. The ordeal sparked a newfound confidence in him, extending far beyond his personal life into his professional endeavors. His colleagues admired his focus and tenacity, while Ava, his steadfast friend, began to view him in a new light. During a quiet dinner one evening, she leaned closer, her voice both kind and resolute. "You've changed, Nicholas. You're sharper, more resilient, a stronger version of yourself." A faint smile touched Nicholas's lips. "I didn't have a choice," he admitted. "Eleanor didn't just betray me. She forced me to confront who I'd become." Ava reached across the table, her hand lightly resting on his, a gesture of silent encouragement. "She hurt you," Ava said gently, "but you're the one rebuilding your life." Meanwhile, Eleanor's downward spiral continued. Desperation led her to a series of poor decisions, dragging her further from the life she had once held dear. She eventually found work at a small diner, the only job available after Nicholas's lawyer unveiled her infidelity and financial misconduct during their divorce. Each shift was grueling. Her coworkers whispered behind her back, and customers often recognized her as the woman who had destroyed her marriage for a fleeting affair. The humiliation was constant, but she had no choice but to endure it. One night, after an exhausting shift, she scrolled through old photos on her phone. Images of vacations and celebrations with Nicholas stared back at her, frozen reminders of the happiness she had squandered. Holding the phone to her chest, she sobbed quietly, the weight of her regret overwhelming. As for Daniel, the man for whom Eleanor had risked everything, his life was in shambles. Nicholas's private investigator ensured that Daniel's indiscretions became public, tarnishing his reputation at work and at home. Rumors of his involvement with a married woman spread quickly. Within weeks he was isolated at work, his chances for promotion vanished, and his personal relationships unraveled. His girlfriend, blindsided by the revelations, left him without a word. Disgraced and alone, Daniel moved away, leaving behind a trail of broken relationships and a sullied name. One brisk winter afternoon, Nicholas unexpectedly encountered Eleanor. He had stopped by the grocery store to pick up a bottle of wine for an evening with Claire, his new partner, when he saw her in the parking lot. She was struggling to start her old, battered car. For a moment he hesitated, torn between walking away and addressing her. Finally, he chose the latter. "Eleanor," he said evenly as he approached. She froze at the sound of his voice and looked up sharply. When her eyes met his, they brimmed with tears. "Nicholas," she whispered, her voice shaky. His face remained impassive as he replied, "I didn't expect to see you here." She dropped her gaze, her shame evident. "This is my life now," she murmured. "I suppose I deserve it." Nicholas's jaw tightened. Though he wasn't a vindictive man, he couldn't deny the grim satisfaction of seeing her brought low. "We all live with the outcomes of our choices," he said. "That's how life works." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I'm sorry, Nicholas, for everything. I was selfish and blind. I barely recognize myself anymore." Nicholas took a deep breath, the anger that had once consumed him now replaced by quiet resolve. "I hope you find a way to move forward, Eleanor. But whatever we had is gone. You need to accept that." Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the cold, alone. Nicholas's life with Claire, meanwhile, thrived. Their relationship was rooted in trust, mutual respect, and genuine affection. They moved in together, their home filled with laughter and a sense of calm Nicholas had not experienced in years. Claire's steady support helped him heal the wounds left by Eleanor. One evening, as they relaxed by the fireplace, Claire rested her head on his shoulder. "You're a good man, Nicholas," she said softly. "Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Nicholas kissed her hair gently. "And you," he replied, "are the best thing that's ever happened to me." As for Eleanor, she eventually left town in search of a new beginning. She settled in a quiet city, renting a modest apartment and slowly reconstructing her life. The pain of losing Nicholas never fully faded, but it became a constant reminder of what she had lost and the importance of what she had taken for granted. Nicholas, however, fully embraced his future with Claire. Through her, he discovered that love wasn't just about sacrifice, but about partnership, mutual growth, and unwavering respect. While the scars of his past remained, they no longer defined him. He had emerged from betrayal stronger and wiser, determined to never again settle for less than he deserved. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The voice on the phone was steady and formal. "This is the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. Am I speaking with Brandon Scott?" The woman's tone was measured, yet it carried an impersonal quality that set me on edge. I couldn't fathom why anyone in Los Angeles would need to contact me. I had no ties there. "Yes, this is Brandon Scott," I answered, my voice trembling slightly. "What is this about?" She introduced herself as Lori Vandenberg, an assistant coroner. "We have an unidentified body in our care," she began. "We were hoping you might help us identify her." Her words were clinical, but a subtle tension underscored her explanation. According to Lori, the deceased had no ID, and her fingerprints didn't match any database. What they did find was a stamped envelope addressed to me at an outdated address. They had tracked me down through my parents to reach my current contact information. As she mentioned the letter, a gnawing unease took hold. My thoughts drifted to someone I hadn't spoken of in years, someone who once meant everything to me. Lucy Kaufman. Nearly a decade ago, Lucy was supposed to become my wife, but just months before the wedding, she disappeared from my life, running off to Los Angeles with Ray Hall, my best friend at the time. The aftermath left me shattered in ways words couldn't capture. "The letter is sealed," Lori explained, "and we can't open it without breaching protocol. If it helps, we can email you a photograph of the deceased. Alternatively, we could arrange for you to come to Los Angeles. With the proper documentation, we can give you the letter in person. Perhaps it could aid in confirming her identity." After a moment's hesitation, I requested the photo. When it arrived, I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, unable to process what I was seeing. Overwhelmed, I agreed to fly to Los Angeles the next day. My boss approved the leave without issue, but my wife, Addison, had a much different reaction. "Why do they need you?" Addison asked, her frustration apparent. "Couldn't they contact her family instead?" Her response took me by surprise. Addison had never been the jealous type, nor had she ever shown bitterness toward Lucy's memory. "It's not that simple," I said, trying to explain. "The letter is their only lead, and I'm the one it's addressed to. They need something definitive before reaching out to anyone else." Addison sighed heavily but eventually softened. "You're doing the right thing," she conceded, "but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel conflicted. It's irrational, but it's there. Lucy was your first love. If she hadn't left, I wouldn't even be here." Her voice cracked and tears welled in her eyes. "That's all ancient history, Addie," I reassured her. "Even if it is Lucy, she's not part of our lives anymore." "I know," she murmured, "but it's still sad. If it's her, her family will never get the chance to make things right." The flight from Charlotte to Los Angeles was uneventful, though my mind raced the entire time. Memories of Lucy surged back in vivid detail. We'd met as juniors at the University of North Carolina, where I studied accounting and she pursued theater. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. Coming from a family of educators and civil servants, I was grounded in practicality. Theater, with its flamboyant personalities and creative chaos, was foreign territory to me. Our paths would never have crossed if not for a fateful afternoon in the library. I had been searching for a book on John Maynard Keynes when I accidentally bumped into her. She was petite, no taller than 5 feet, with striking blue eyes and raven black hair. The collision startled her, and she stumbled backward. I instinctively reached out to steady her, muttering an apology. She glared at me briefly before walking away without a word. 2 weeks later, I saw her again during an outdoor theater performance near the Student Union. She was captivating on stage, and I couldn't bring myself to leave. After the show, I gathered the courage to approach her and ask her out for coffee. To my surprise, she agreed. That moment marked the beginning of a whirlwind romance. 8 months after graduation, we were set to marry. I had landed a job at an accounting firm in Charlotte, while Lucy was preparing to join the theater department at UNC Charlotte. Everything seemed to fall into place. Ray Hall, my best friend and next-door neighbor, was a constant presence in our lives. Charismatic and effortlessly charming, he was my polar opposite in many ways. Despite his reputation as a womanizer, we grew close, and Lucy quickly warmed to him, perhaps too much. "Why can't you stick with one girl?" Lucy would tease him, amused by his ever-changing roster of girlfriends. "Variety keeps life interesting," he'd reply with a grin. Then, almost as if it were an afterthought, he'd add, "But if I had someone like you, Lucy, I'd never let her go." Looking back, the signs were there. Lucy and I spent most of our weekends planning the wedding, but one Friday night changed everything. She begged me to take her to a trendy new bar. When she arrived at my apartment that evening, radiant and full of excitement, I had no idea that night would mark the beginning of the end. Lucy was notoriously late. Punctuality wasn't just a challenge for her, it was almost an alien concept. So when she arrived that day with her characteristic tardiness and uttered those 4 dreaded words, I knew trouble was brewing. "We need to talk." As her words spilled out, I listened quietly, occasionally responding with vague acknowledgments. She unveiled a plan she'd clearly been ruminating on, one that turned our relationship on its head. Lucy explained that before settling down into marriage, she wanted to explore more. It took a moment for her intention to register fully. "Wait, are you saying you want to date other guys before we get married?" I asked, my voice sharp with disbelief. "Pretty much, yeah," she replied, her tone maddeningly casual. "I've even made plans for tonight. I'm going out with Ray." Ray, my so-called best friend. the same guy Lucy had routinely criticized for his reckless romantic exploits. Ray? The guy you've called a shameless player? I asked, incredulous. Well, he's always been into me, she said with an air of nonchalance. And he's attractive, so why not start with someone familiar? My mind went blank for a moment before snapping back into focus. Let's be clear about this, Lucy, I said, keeping my voice steady. If you go on a date with Ray or anyone else, there won't be a wedding. If this is how you handle commitment now, I can't imagine how you'd handle it in the future. Her response was swift and heated. You don't own me. It's my life, my body, and I'll do what I want, she shouted. I stood without another word, took her by the hand, and guided her to the door. You're absolutely right, I said with calm finality, before closing the door behind her and tuning out her protests. The confirmation of her decision came sooner than expected. Ray, ever the opportunist, sent me a barrage of selfies, photos of him and Lucy cozying up at a bar. I hurled my phone across the room in frustration and retreated into isolation, cutting myself off from the world. When I finally set up a new phone, it was flooded with messages. Lucy's texts ranged from affectionate pleas to angry accusations. Both our families had also reached out, hers in confusion, mine in disappointment over the abrupt cancellation of the wedding. Lucy had carefully curated her version of events, painting her actions in a far gentler light. It wasn't until I shared the photos with my mother that she grasped the full truth. That marked the last time I spoke to Lucy. Despite her attempts to mend things, I refused to engage. Soon after, she moved to Los Angeles with Ray. For me, moving forward wasn't as simple. Her betrayal left deep scars, making me question not just her but everyone around me. Trust felt like a distant, unreachable concept, and for 2 years I buried myself in work, avoiding personal connections entirely. Then came Jacqueline Blackwell. She walked into my life unexpectedly, seeking help with a tax issue at the accounting firm where I worked. By chance, I was assigned her case. Meeting her in the reception area for the first time, I was struck by her resemblance to the iconic singer Saad, graceful, composed, and stunning, with a soft Jamaican accent, adding a unique allure to her voice. Our sessions became the highlight of my week. By her second visit, she had traded her business-like attire for a sleek black leather skirt and a fitted pink blouse that showcased her elegant form. Her hair fell in loose curls, perfectly framing her radiant face. When our work was done, I mustered the courage to ask for her number. To my relief, she obliged. A few days later, I called her. Hey, Jacqueline, I began. What are you up to after work today? Her laughter came through the line, warm and teasing. What took you so long to ask? Jacqueline, or Addison, as she preferred to be called, was 7 years older than me. She'd been through her share of serious relationships but hadn't found someone she saw as a lifelong partner. Her honesty and grounded nature captivated me, and our bond deepened quickly. There was only one hitch: her mother. Skeptical of me, and influenced by the story of my broken engagement, she expressed doubts. Addison, curious herself, eventually asked me to share the full story. I hesitated but decided to lay it all out. As I spoke, her expression shifted from disbelief to anger over how I had been treated. When I finished, she reached across the table, placing her hand gently over mine. Thank you for sharing that with me, she said softly. With Addison, I found something I never thought I'd have again: trust. She helped me rebuild my faith in love, proving that even after the deepest betrayal, it was possible to heal and move forward. The parents of that child should be utterly embarrassed by their behavior. If it were my daughter, I'd have turned her over my knee and left her with a memory she wouldn't soon forget, Addison's mother declared with an assured nod. Her gaze left no doubt she meant every word. While I doubted Addison would ever pull a stunt as outrageous as Lucy's, I knew her mother wouldn't hesitate to deliver justice if she did. Addison didn't share my bed until our 9th date, but when she did, it was worth every moment of the wait. Just a few months later, I proposed to Addison, and this time, I made it all the way to the altar. 2 years after our wedding, our son Ellery was born, and 2 years after that, We welcomed our daughter, Jada. Life was shaping up to be more fulfilling than I had ever imagined. But when my flight landed that day, a car was waiting to rush me to the coroner's office. Lori Vandenberg met me at the entrance and escorted me to the body. As we walked, she handed me a letter. The sight awaiting me was horrific. The remains were nearly unrecognizable, the head severed. The body had been abandoned in a Los Angeles park for several days before anyone discovered it. "It's been a long time, Miss Vandenberg," I said, the weight of our last encounter 9 years earlier pressing down on me. "It certainly has," she responded, her tone subdued. "She's almost beyond recognition. Meth abuse can do that. There were drugs in her system, her teeth were missing, and she'd been living on the streets for a while." Lori paused before asking, "Were you two involved?" "She was my fiancée," I admitted. "We were supposed to marry in 4 months, but everything fell apart when she started seeing my former best friend. They came to this city together. I have no idea what became of him." "What was his name?" Lori asked, typing as I provided the answer. "Ray Hall has been in prison for 6 years on drug-related charges," she informed me in a matter-of-fact tone. "Why didn't she ever go back home?" "She never told her family the truth about why we broke up," I replied. "It was probably easier for her to stay here and maintain the facade. She knew exactly who Ray was when she turned to him. And what kind of person betrays his best friend so easily?" Lori's expression softened. "I'm sorry, but if you're unsure about her identity, you might want to look at that letter you've been holding." Only then did I realize I'd been nervously fiddling with the envelope. The handwriting on the front bore a striking resemblance to Lucy's, even after nearly a decade. Opening it, I read, "Brandon, if you're expecting an apology, forget it. You owe me one. If you'd just agreed to let me go on a few dates before the wedding, as I asked, everything would have gone as planned. By now we could have had a family. But no, you pushed me toward Ray Hall, and look where that got me. Ray was nothing but a con artist. You failed me." The note ended abruptly, unsigned, though the tone was unmistakably hers. "It's her," I murmured. Silence hung in the air until a thought occurred to me. "Wait," I said, reaching for my wallet. "I've kept a photo of her for years." My wallet, worn from over a decade of use, held a small compartment for photos. Among them was a picture of Lucy and me, tucked in the farthest slot. But when I peeled back the plastic, it wasn't there. A piece of the leather backing had torn away, taking the image with it. "I guess it's gone," I said, an unexpected wave of sadness washing over me. "I'm sorry." "That's all right. You've confirmed her identity," Lori said. I provided her with Lucy's parents' contact information, noting they still lived in North Carolina. Yet I knew they'd hear the news from someone else. They hadn't forgiven me for what had happened all those years ago. On the drive back to the airport, I called Addison. For the first time, my past and present collided in a way I couldn't ignore. Addison had been my fresh start. Her love and stability had allowed me to leave the pain of my old life behind. With her and our children, it felt like I'd been given a second chance. "It was her," I told Addison. "Her life ended tragically, and she blamed me for it." "That's nonsense," Addison replied firmly, her voice steady and reassuring. "She made her own choices. I'm the one who picked you up and never let go. When you get home, I'll remind you exactly where you belong." When I walked through the front door, Addison pulled me into a tight embrace, holding me with all her strength. True to her word, she wasted no time showing me how much I was loved. What took me by surprise, though, was when she retrieved something from the nightstand, the missing photograph of Lucy and me, its edges still stuck to scraps of leather. "I found this in your wallet about a year after we got married," Addison confessed softly. "I'd never touched your wallet before, but curiosity got the better of me. When I saw it, I felt jealous even though I knew I shouldn't. So I took it out and hid it. I'm sorry." Her cheeks flushed as she looked down, ashamed. For a moment, I absorbed her words. Then, with a sudden clarity, I realized how deeply I loved her for this simple human act. Without saying a word, I shook my head. Addison glanced at the photograph one last time before tearing it into small pieces and flushing them down the bathroom sink. We didn't need it anymore. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. For half an hour, he had silently watched his captivating wife glide through the ballroom, determined that by midnight, she'd be far from him. Among the room's wealthy and self-satisfied guests, she moved like a prized delicacy at a feast, admired, embraced, and kissed by nearly every executive from his office, with his unbearably arrogant boss leading the charge. It wasn't unexpected. The same degrading spectacle had unfolded at the company's New Year's gatherings for the past 2 years. The first time he dismissed it, chalking her antics up to too much champagne. But last year, as the party roared louder, he began to form a plan. His thoughts were interrupted by a tug on his sleeve. He turned to find Dedra, Rosalie's closest friend and frequent accomplice in mischief. "Happy New Year, Anthony!" she exclaimed, leaning in for the customary kiss, a gesture he barely acknowledged before pulling back and meeting her gaze. Dedra was another of the trust fund elite, her fortune even larger than Rosalie's. Her usual expression carried a smugness that silently mocked his lack of old money roots. Tonight, though, her face showed something unusual, a mix of pity and concern. "Don't take it so hard, Anthony," she said softly. "It's just tradition. She'll come back to you soon and everything will be fine. She loves you, you know." He raised a skeptical brow. Dedra pressed on. "She does. Rosalie's just vibrant, social. You're more reserved, introspective. She needs to surround herself with energy sometimes, but it only makes her value you more when she comes back." "Oh, really, Dedra?" he replied coolly. "Is that why she spent the Christmas party under the mistletoe with half her colleagues? At her event, she danced with everyone but me. And now, at mine, she's taking it even further. Let's call it what it is. Is kissing Peter de Ambasso a dozen times part of this tradition? Or is it her unique way of showing love, knowing how much I despise him?" Dedra's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She avoided his gaze as she murmured, "Anthony, I know you're upset, but try to see the bigger picture." "Oh, I see it clearly," he shot back. "For the first time in 5 years of marriage, everything makes sense." He turned and walked to their table, retrieving a large, brightly wrapped package from underneath. He removed his wedding ring and tied it to the ribbon on the gift. Without facing her, he held it out to Dedra. "I'm leaving. Give this to your friend when, or if, she's done with her admirers. Wish her a happy new year and let her know I hope she gets exactly what she deserves." As he moved to leave, Dedra grabbed his arm. "Don't do this, Anthony," she pleaded. "I'll get her. She's just had too much to drink. Take her home." He shook his head. "No need. She's staying here. She booked a suite earlier today, entertaining while I was working. You knew, didn't you? You were here with her. She has her car, her things. One of her companions will make sure she's comfortable. Maybe all of them will." Dedra stared, stunned. "Don't look at me like that," he added. "You lied to me last year. I gave her this year to make a choice. She's made it. So have I. Goodbye, Dedra. I'll be glad never to see you again." Leaving the ballroom, Anthony nodded to Helen, the HR director, who had spent the afternoon with him while his boss and colleagues celebrated in the suite. In reality, they had been indulging on the company's dime. Rosalie had been there too. Anthony had the evidence, photos and videos. So did Helen, who was about to share them with the board chairman. Inside, Helen and her husband made their way to the crowd around Rosalie. Dedra, meanwhile, pushed through the revelers, avoiding drunken attempts from men seeking another traditional kiss. Helen's husband's imposing presence cleared a path as Helen reached Peter Moore, the CEO, at the same moment Dedra did. Dedra's sharp call of Rosalie's name made her turn abruptly, breaking away from Peter's embrace with a frown. Dedra thrust the package into Rosalie's hands. "Anthony left this for you," she said. "He's gone. He saw everything tonight." Rosalie laughed dismissively. "Oh, Anthony, he always gets sulky when I don't pay him attention. I'll go home, apologize, and he'll feel foolish. He loves me too much to stay angry." She smiled at the gift. "See? Even when he's upset, he leaves me presents. Let's see what it is." Wait, Daedra began, but Rosalie was already untying the ribbon. The ring fell to the floor. Rosalie froze. Peter picked it up, smirking. Isn't this your husband's wedding ring? Rosalie's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she took it from him. She glanced at Daedra, who whispered, I tried to warn you. Ignoring her, Rosalie tore off the wrapping paper to reveal a white box. Smiling nervously, she shook it. It's heavy, she noted, prying at the tape. As the last strip came free, the box's contents spilled onto the floor. Glossy photographs and documents scattered everywhere. Rosalie crouched to gather them, others stepping in to help. But as they saw the images, everyone froze. Rosalie's eyes widened in horror. No! She screamed, her voice cutting through the noise and silencing the room. More onlookers gathered, drawn to the commotion. As her meticulously crafted facade shattered, Anthony was already far away. Daedra's eyes widened in bewilderment when she saw the horror on Peter's face. He stooped down, picked up the glossy photograph from the floor, and pressed it against his immaculate suit. His voice thundered through the room as he shouted, Rosalie, what in the world is this? The outburst drew every gaze toward the scattered photos carpeting the floor. Each image depicted Rosalie in compromising situations with various individuals who were clearly not her husband. Among the damning photographs were shots of Rosalie with Peter himself, alongside others featuring her entangled with executives from Anthony's firm, her colleagues, and even her higher-ups. Though not an exhaustive Kama Sutra catalog, the collection revealed an explicit array of encounters involving men, women, and various other participants and configurations. Rosalie's response was dramatic. She crumpled to the ground in a faint. Quick-thinking Peter nudged his foot beneath her head just in time, sparing her from a painful collision with the hard tiles. Daedra, dropping to her knees, gently cradled Rosalie's head and began patting her cheeks while shouting, Rosalie, wake up! Can you hear me? Are you okay? While Daedra tended to the unconscious Rosalie, others in the room began gathering up the incriminating photos. A particular woman, upon examining one of the images, turned on her husband with fury. You lying cheat! No wonder you're always too exhausted for me! She shrieked. Her husband's feeble attempt at denial was cut short as her handbag connected with his face, eliciting a yelp. Matters worsened for him when she delivered a sharp kick to his groin, leaving him doubled over in agony. As he writhed, she crouched and rifled through the photographs. Lifting one for all to see, she declared loudly, If your husband works in management at Clements & Sons, you'll want to have a look. These faces might be familiar. Another voice chimed in from across the room. There are USB drives here too. Who knows what's on them? The chaos intensified. A striking blonde confronted a well-dressed older man waving a photograph in his face. Remember our prenup? You're finished, you shameless creep. The man stammered. Sweetheart, it's not what it looks like. She threw herself at me, I swear. It only happened once and it meant nothing. Ignoring his protests, the blonde's fiery gaze followed him as he fled the room, her threats ringing in his ears. Elsewhere, a woman clutched a photo to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Beside her, her husband buried his face in his hands, silently weeping. In another corner, a man waved an incriminating picture at his wife, his voice trembling with anger. You've always refused a threesome, claiming you'd never consider it. What's your excuse for this, then? The accused woman flushed scarlet and retreated hastily, her towering stilettos clicking awkwardly against the floor. One particularly bold woman gathered a handful of photographs and stood in the ballroom's center, calling out names. One by one, bewildered wives came forward to claim the images. Their initial confusion turned to rage as they confronted their husbands, delivering slaps and angry tirades. This dramatic sequence played out again and again, leaving a trail of humiliated men nursing both physical and emotional wounds. As Rosalie stirred, she found herself sitting upright in Daedra's supportive arms, her expression dazed as she took in the pandemonium around her. A man in an elegant tuxedo knelt by her side, speaking softly. Are you all right? She nodded faintly, still disoriented. What's your name? He continued. Summoning a steady tone despite her evident despair, she replied, I'm Rosalie Martin, though I doubt anyone can help me now. His eyebrows rose in recognition. "Rosalie Martin," he echoed. When she confirmed with another nod, he pulled out a stack of papers and handed them to her. Without hesitation, he snapped a photo of her with his phone and announced loudly, "Miss Martin, you've been officially served. These documents and the attached photos and videos are part of Anthony Martin's divorce proceedings." He turned to the stunned crowd and declared, "For those who haven't yet seen the photos, they're included in these public filings. They document Miss Martin's activities over the past year, complete with dates and locations. If anyone wants additional details or digital copies, you can reach out to me, for a small fee, of course." Offering a theatrical bow, he exited the room, leaving behind a storm of tears, fury, and recriminations. As he walked away, he reflected on his antics, wondering if they might one day lead to trouble, though his New Jersey connections gave him confidence he could weather any fallout. Rosalie, still clutching the divorce papers, sat motionless, her confidence shattered. She scanned the faces around her, finding only contempt, pity, or disgust. The admiration and envy she once thrived on had vanished. Overwhelmed by humiliation, she buried her face in Deidre's chest and sobbed uncontrollably. Nearby, Peter Clements barked orders to his staff. "Gather every single one of those photos and destroy them immediately." Turning his glare to Helen, he snapped, "I want a reprimand letter from Anthony Martin on my desk by Monday, followed by his termination papers." Helen remained composed as she replied, "That won't be possible, sir. Mr. Martin resigned earlier today. He's already used his accrued leave and submitted 2 weeks' notice." Peter's face reddened with fury. "Then I'll reject his resignation. He's fired anyway. I'll make sure he never works in this industry again." Helen's calm demeanor didn't falter. "I'm afraid that won't work, sir. Before leaving, Mr. Martin met with the chairman of the board, your father, who accepted his resignation. Additionally, Mr. Martin already has a new position with a consulting firm, which you personally approved in writing." Peter's anger boiled over, and he began muttering curses aimed at both his father and Anthony Martin. Meanwhile, Helen and her husband exchanged discreet glances, their hands clasping under the table in silent celebration, their outward expressions remaining professionally neutral. As Anthony Martin steered his freshly delivered, custom-designed, all-wheel drive Chevrolet SUV out of New York City, the deep growl of its 6.2-liter turbodiesel engine mirrored his sense of emancipation. He'd commissioned the vehicle when the latest models were unveiled the previous autumn, and it had finally been delivered just yesterday. His GPS estimated the drive to his new residence in Austin, Texas, would span 24 hours and 32 minutes. But Anthony wasn't in a hurry. A small-town Idahoan at heart, he planned to relish the journey, soaking in the rural charm and cultural highlights along the way. His itinerary included detours through Virginia's scenic routes, bypassing major highways in favor of the back roads celebrated in folk songs and nostalgic lyrics. Anthony envisioned himself pausing to browse roadside stalls laden with homemade preserves and savoring meals at quaint diners where the locals gathered, a world apart from the urban grind he had grown to despise. The divorce proceedings with his ex-wife were finalized, and although the financial division was not completely balanced, he had enough money to buy an $88,000 SUV, a choice he considered a symbolic victory. Rosalie, who had consistently earned 10 times his income during their marriage, might hardly notice the loss, but for Anthony, using a portion of that money to reclaim his independence was poetic. Under their agreement, they each kept their respective investments and retirement savings. She retained her penthouse and trust fund, as long as she agreed to sign the papers promptly, terms Anthony thought were more than generous. With the radio tuned to a classic country station, music Rosalie had always loathed, Anthony felt a surge of freedom. For the first time in years, he was in full control of his life, no longer the submissive spouse she had often belittled. His determination had crystallized when the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, and every day since had been devoted to this moment. The fate of Clements & Sons, the company he had worked to build, was no longer his concern. Bereft of his groundbreaking designs and patents, the business was now under Peter's inept leadership, and Anthony felt certain it would crumble within a year or two. The thought brought a satisfied smirk to his face. Anthony took pride in knowing that his contributions had accounted for over half of the company's revenue the previous year. He had even more innovative designs ready for his next venture. He imagined Randolph Clements, the company's aging chairman and Peter's father, scrambling to salvage the firm before it sank completely. Peter's inadequacies would soon be glaringly evident, and the thought filled Anthony with a sense of vindication. The plans he had orchestrated to expose both Peter and Rosalie as dishonest were unfolding seamlessly. His new enterprise, he was certain, would soon overshadow his old one, leaving Peter's incompetence exposed to all. The dramatic reveal Anthony had staged at the gala had already caused ripples. Helen, a trusted ally, had called to praise the flawless execution of the event. The photos, strategically placed around the ballroom, had surpassed his expectations. He had designed the box holding the photos to collapse spectacularly when unsealed, ensuring maximum impact. Rosalie's parents, who had always dismissed him due to his non-Ivy League education, had been particularly scornful of his engineering credentials, despite his degrees from the prestigious Colorado School of Mines and the University of Michigan. Their disdain only made their humiliation sweeter. Meanwhile, Rosalie's night had ended in heartbreak. Driven home by her parents, she broke down completely upon entering their apartment. On the ride over, she had mentally rehearsed a justification for her actions, intending to argue that her extramarital affairs had no impact on her love for Anthony. She planned to frame them as harmless, stress-relieving diversions that even strengthened their relationship. But she knew deep down that Anthony, uncompromising in his view of their vows, would never buy such excuses. Seeing their home devoid of his belongings forced her to confront the finality of their split. Rosalie collapsed onto the floor, consumed by a mixture of regret and fury at her own hubris. She had never anticipated this outcome, confident in her ability to manipulate Anthony's forgiving nature. For 3 years she had deceived him without a second thought. But now, her carefully crafted image lay in ruins. Anthony's departure was more than a personal loss. It was a devastating blow to her social standing. While Anthony embarked on his new chapter, he ensured his departure left a trail of reckoning. He had cloned his SIM card before discarding the original, giving him control over communication while remaining untraceable. Scheduled emails sent damning evidence to unsuspecting spouses, unraveling relationships one by one. Anthony derived grim satisfaction from the upheaval he caused, particularly in sending irrefutable proof of Deidre's complicity to her husband. Deidre, who had encouraged Rosalie's behavior with gleeful abandon, now faced the consequences alongside her friend. In New York, Deidre and Rosalie sat in shock as their world crumbled. Deidre's husband, Al, had expelled her after receiving Anthony's email and video evidence, which documented not just infidelities, but also incriminating conversations. Al had forwarded the footage to the spouses of the named men, igniting a chain reaction of betrayals and revelations. Meanwhile, Peter was swiftly disowned by his father and removed from the company. Randolph, stepping in as interim CEO, began the arduous process of rebuilding, enlisting Helen's help to stabilize the business. Anthony's journey brought him to Austin, where he navigated the streets with a sense of anticipation. His new company had provided a luxury high-rise apartment with 6 months of prepaid rent, giving him time to find a home that matched his vision of open spaces and greenery. He looked forward to adopting a dog and meeting someone who shared his values and aspirations. His partners had organized a barbecue to introduce him to the local community, promising a chance to meet potential companions. Back in New York, the scandal Anthony had unleashed continued to spread, exposing lies and unraveling lives. Helen kept him updated, recounting each dramatic turn with relish. As Anthony drove through Austin, surrounded by the promise of a fresh start, he felt nothing but gratitude for the bold decision to leave the chaos behind and rebuild his life in Texas. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.